The Satanic Kingdom creates idols. Why? You'll never see past your idol. It doesn't matter if it's a man, a belief structure, a statue, a symbol, or a security. If you hold that idol above God, you will never see the truth. If you trust that thing more than God, you have an idol. This video will contain a macro outlook, as a micro outlook is just too complex, and I don't want to make mistakes due to incomplete or unknown information, because people, I have found, are not very forgiving if you do make a mistake. Furthermore, if you are taught how to understand the occult, you'll start to see what they are planning, and that's the goal of this channel. I don't want to be a source for you to continuously have to listen to. I want to teach you what to look for so you don't need my channel in the future. Many have stopped listening because they don't understand the whole agenda and the tactics used to control the minds of man. So my information isn't fully understood and therefore not worthy of one's time. So this series is going to be a long one, and most likely one of my final series, because if this knowledge is not shared, then the idols of the masses are too rooted in the deceptions. This is the reason for the remnant. The prideful, thick-necked people already have their postmodernist truth. If you want to figure out what's happening, it's a good idea to look at definitions and tactics that the secret societies employ to deceive the public. You can apply these definitions and tactics on any individual or group to discover their true objective. You may not be 100% correct, as there are many manipulations, but you will be a lot stronger at detecting them. Matthew 10:16. I am sending you out like sheep surrounded by wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Learn the tricks and pitfalls of the kingdom of Satan, but do not employ them. Instead, be the Prince of Peace. Let me ask you some questions first. Is the legacy media trustworthy, or should you research what the media platforms tell you before blindly believing them? If someone leaves the media to create their own new digital media or new media platform, does that instantly mean they are credible? If some personality or organization is kicked off of a platform like YouTube, does that instantly mean they are credible? What does counterintelligence mean? Cambridge Dictionary. Secret action taken by a country to prevent another country from discovering its military, industrial, or political secrets. Dictionary of Military and Associated Terms. Counterintelligence is information gathered and activities conducted to protect against espionage, other intelligence activities, sabotage, or assassinations conducted by or on behalf of foreign governments or elements thereof, foreign organizations, or foreign persons, or international terrorist activities. DNI.gov. Counterintelligence has both a defensive mission, protecting the nation's secrets and assets against foreign intelligence penetration, and an offensive mission, finding out what foreign intelligence organizations are planning to better defeat their aims. Atheism is a fine example of a religion. The atheist believes in a group of principles that are made up through a tactic classified as scientism. Scientism creates the illusion of science, but its only goal is to invent or manufacture theories in an attempt to disprove God by corrupting, gaslighting, and confusing the individual who listens. This can be proven through the occult teaching of evolution. I understand some of you may scoff at this if you have never heard this before, but when you study Freemasonry and Kabbalah, you'll see their Gnostic belief structure built right into their scientism. And you'll anticipate their tactics, and you will soon develop the ability to see right past them.
When I first made the correlations between Kabbalah and science, I was stunned.
We do know that Isaac Newton had access to certain mystical texts, certain texts of the Kabbalah.
Well, the Kabbalistic description of creation is coming from a single little point, from a speck, and of having matter form and time and space form all together at the very beginning. This sounds very much to me like the description of the Big Bang.
I couldn't believe that the Kabbalists could derive these truths without really knowing any mathematics or physics.
It is certainly true that in string theory, the number 10 is the dimension of space-time for supersymmetrical string theories, and 26 for bosonic string theories stand out as a requirement of the mathematics.
All the things that could destroy string theory, all the things that do destroy every rival theory to string theory, they are all eliminated in precisely 10 and 26 dimensions. These dimensions are magic. We physicists don't know where these dimensions come from.
The Zohar says those things. It could have been a lucky guess. I don't know.
The Zohar speaks of impure fats and pure fats, and that relates very well to modern medicine's view of the two types of cholesterol.
Now you tell me, how come that's the only text with 2,000 years old can have that kind of information so clearly there?
They knew things about the universe that took us till now to discover.
I think it's rather intriguing that the Zohar mentions cholesterol and mentions the liver and bile.
What I like about Kabbalah is that it has a rather profound view of a creator, of a divine being that transcends all possible notions that we could have.
There can be an interface between science and spirituality.
The Zohar's notion that light is a realm of no time and no space is quite consistent with special relativity.
What's been stopping it so far are, number one, the lack of a good concept, and I think the Kabbalah is offering that now in the context of modern science. And two, a reticence on the part of both scientists and people in religion to mix the two.
It's rather amazing, this uncanny reflection of some of the most advanced cosmology coming from our satellites, coming from our atom smashers, coming from our blackboards, that are mirrored in the Zohar and ancient Kabbalistic texts.
You will see who and what they worship, and that they create a religion or idol to blind you. In evolution, you become your own idol as you bask in the intelligence and superiority of yourself. Evolution, by scientism's own definition, is mathematically impossible. This is a point atheists love to still argue. But on top of that, atheists refuse to research the individuals who created their religion, why they fabricated it, and what organizations they come from. Each foundational father of the religion was a Freemason. This is important, especially when you learn about the society that controls the Freemasons, which will be exposed later in this video, along with a surprising revelation for many. Atheism is a Gnostic religion designed to fail.
You know, a lot of people will say, well, it just seems so hard to believe the Bible because of all those miracles and everything. Well, the Big Bang's a miracle, evolution of life would have to be a miracle, and the changing of that life into all the origin of the species all require violations of the laws of science. To believe there's no God, you're going to have to believe in miracles without a miracle maker. To believe that evolution is true, you're going to have to violate some of the main, most important principles and laws of science that have been agreed upon. Not only does the evolutionary atheist worldview violate the first law of thermodynamics, that's against a principle of science, but also Louis Pasteur proved spontaneous generation wasn't true. But all evolutionists, every evolutionist believes in spontaneous generation of life.
This whole evolutionary concept that life came from non-life, it actually violates a law of science. It is one of the only laws in biology. It's called the law of biogenesis. It says that life comes from life, not non-life.
the law of biogenesis that says all life comes from pre-existing life. And yet evolution says that life can come from non-life. Surprise, if you just wait long enough.
But you know what? We see no examples of that today. We can't observe it. We can't repeat it. People just believe it blindly.
Anytime they've done these type of origin of life experiments where they're trying to take a soup, so to speak, of all these different molecules, add a little bit of lightning, and
cook everything together, add a spark, and out comes
tar, they end up with gunk. They have to do a lot of tweaking to end up with
amino acids. That's impressive. Ooh.
It's not even meaningful information as far as DNA is concerned.
Every evolutionary story starts with the Miller-Urey experiment.
The best yields they've ever gotten was 80% L amino acids and 20% D amino acids. That would mean that every fifth amino acid in a protein series would be lethal to all forms of life on our planet. The evolutionists tried to get away from this problem of chirality.
The odds for 250 parts coming together, that is 2 times 10 raised to the 476th power. That is going to be a 2 with 476 zeros following after it. That's the odds for the first cell to come into existence.
The best they've been able to do is the idea that the amino acids assembled themselves on the backs of floating crystals in the ocean. Their schemes and the things they've tried to imagine just don't work.
If you take the cell and you poke a hole in it, you have all the components for the cell and yet no life.
They'll say, well, that's an origin of life issue and I'm not going to deal with that. But you have to deal with it because there's no point in dealing with any of these other things if you cannot even get an organism in the first place.
The problems are exponential. People in the field actually know this, but go with it anyway because, well, after all, the other disciplines of science are where the real proof is. So the geologists think that the real proof is with the paleontologists. The fossil studiers think the geophysicists have the proof. The geophysicists think it's the astrophysicists that have the proof. Everyone gets to the airport and thinks somebody else brought the tickets.
They would never do this in any other area of their life. They're denying the obvious because of their starting point that there is no God.
Well, a lot of people are enticed by this idea because it takes God out of the picture.
Here's another way in which young people are being conned. When they read their textbooks and it's talking about changes in finches' beaks or changes you see in dogs, the word evolution is used. But then the word evolution is also used for molecules to man, so it's a bait and switch.
Just like all the other sequences, like chimps gradually turning into humans, and this little Bambi-looking thing turning into horses, those kinds of things that have been used for evolution really don't belong in the textbooks. Alan Fiducia, the head of biology at UNC Chapel Hill, says that it will be the paleontological embarrassment of the 20th century, the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs. They're not a related lineage at all.
Man's invention of religion is created to fill the emptiness inside an individual or group when they knowingly or unknowingly leave God. Every religion on earth is a mask or veneer filled with a societal or material righteousness. This includes many denominations of Christianity. Isaiah 64:6. We are all like one who is unclean. All our so-called righteous acts are like menstrual rags in your sight. We all wither like a leaf. Our sins carry us away like the wind. God is not a religion. God is the truth. And He created our true reality and placed it into our very fabric. The Satanic kingdom distorts and gaslights that reality. God cares about your relationship with Him, and this is why the enemy creates idols. That religion, that entertainer, that ritual, that element you think will bring you closer to God becomes a wall that blocks you from God. Even worshiping the cross on your wall or the scriptures, both can lead people into false worship if used as idols. Truly putting God first will open the gate or even tear down the walls that you built throughout your life and allow Him to refill you. To understand this more, please view my Anatomy of a Prayer series. Participate in it, and you will feel these walls come down. So let's go over some tactics and definitions that have been utilized by the satanic cults to manipulate the public through our governments, media, and religions. Revelation of the method. This tactic is used to warn the public of what the occult practitioners are going to do in the future. Another name for this practice is called predictive programming. Examples of this practice include the destruction of the Twin Towers on September the 11th, 2001. The towers were attacked through media as early as the 1970s, and the date of 9/11 was specifically reported in media repeatedly. The Harm in the Arm was shown in the world during the London Olympics, and the British show called Utopia. Revelation of the Method is also showing us future events of the destruction of the West through movies such as The Day After, Threads, The Road, Civil War, I Am Legend, Omega Man, The Day After Tomorrow, Zombieland, World War Z, Escape from New York, and video games like Call of Duty, The Last of Us, Fallout, Wasteland, State of Decay, Half-Life, Gears of War, Portal, and literature like The Road, The Passage, The Stand, Hunger Games, Fahrenheit 451, Divergent, Bird Box. There is a reason for the increase in doomsday post-apocalyptic media. Can you guess why? Is it just about profit? Doublespeak. This is a tactic where one lies without lying. Project 2021, now Project 2030, is a fine example of this. Doublespeak has trained the public to seek pillow, soft, light talk to obfuscate the danger or lessen the reality of heavy subjects. Doublespeak is so ingrained into people's lives that it is now considered necessary in polite society. However, it is actually indirect, subversive language meant to weaken you, and it is not something that you will find on this channel.
In the winter of 1847, George Donner, the co-leader of a California-bound group of American settlers, engaged in intra-species protein reallocation in order to maintain metabolic integrity. However, his failure to fulfill caloric obligations in a timely manner rendered him unviable. This video is about doublespeak, what William Lutz, author of the book titled Doublespeak, defines as
doublespeak is language designed to evade responsibility, make the unpleasant appear pleasant, the unattractive appear attractive. Basically, it's language designed to mislead while pretending not to.
What line of work are you in?
Waste management consultant.
Let's say, for example, the person whose treacherous mountain climb my energy bar company sponsored cannibalized his climbing partner. It would be better for me to say something that technically communicates this information, but doesn't sound as terrible. Lutz says there are at least 4 kinds of doublespeak. Protein reallocation instead of cannibalism, and Tony Soprano's creative phrase to replace mobster would probably fall under the 4th kind of doublespeak, which is inflated language that is designed to make the simple seem complex or to give an air of importance to people, things, or situations.
I don't know if that tape is working. You ate 3 desserts tonight.
Forbearance is the watchword. That triumvirate of Twinkies merely overwhelmed my resolve.
The concept of doublespeak stems from George Orwell's 1984. In the book, doublethink is a key concept. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies. Doublespeak, though, is rarely about deliberately lying. For example, in January 2015, Sid Miller became the Agriculture Commissioner of the state with the 5th fattest high schoolers in the country, Texas. So that same year, along with announcing a plan to combat obesity, he announced updates to the school nutrition policy in Texas, which included rolling back a ban on the use of deep fryers. and allowing the sale of low-calorie beverages in Texas schools. By low-calorie beverages, he means sodas. I guess a soda is technically lower calorie than, say, a meal, but I doubt Coca-Cola is what you're expecting if you ask for a low-calorie beverage at a restaurant.
Why do you have so many bowling balls?
I'm not gonna lie to you, Marge. So long.
So, doublespeak becomes useful obviously when you are obligated to communicate something, but are unable to straight up lie, yet communicating the truth bluntly or as clear as possible doesn't have the listener perceive the information in a way that you would like. For example, when being asked about your current position during a job interview, you might think it would sound better to say, I'm currently economically inactive due to being offered an early retirement opportunity as a result of my previous employer's human resource redundancy elimination initiative. Instead of, I'm unemployed because the company was firing people and I got fired. Edward Sapir, in his essay The Status of Linguistics as a Science, says, language is a guide to social reality. Human beings do not live in the objective world alone, but are very much at the mercy of the particular language which has become the medium of expression for their society. A lot of times we don't want information communicated to us objectively and unembellished. Euphemisms like passed away instead of died, or big boned for fat, are words or phrases that are usually used to avoid a distasteful reality. William Lutz says that this is the first type of doublespeak.
You see, I don't like euphemisms. I don't like language that reflects fear and conceals the truth. Americans can't really handle the truth, so they invent soft language to protect themselves. And it gets worse with every generation. Sometime during my lifetime, toilet paper became bathroom tissue. Used cars became previously owned transportation, and constipation became occasional irregularity. Poor people used to live in slums. Now, the economically disadvantaged occupy substandard housing in the inner cities. They don't have a negative cash flow position. They're broke.
Calling an economic recession a period of accelerated negative growth can be annoying, but certain forms of doublespeak are just deceitful. In Chapter 2, under the section The Doublespeak of Graphs, Lutz gives a dated but clear visual example of doublespeak.
Now here is another chart. Their tax cut, so-called, is the dotted line. Ours is the solid line. As you can see, our tax cut keeps on going down and then stays down permanently. This red space between the two lines is the tax money that will remain in your pockets if our bill passes.
Lutz goes on to point out that there are no numbers on this chart, which means that you have no perspective to evaluate it with. When you make the dollar scale from $0 to $2,500 rather than the awkward $2,150 to $2,400, it appears much less impressive. This kind of graphical doublespeak also appears elsewhere, used by the pharmaceutical industry for the heart-protecting, cholesterol-lowering wonder drug, statins.
So here's the ad in which you see that Lipitor reduced the coronary events and risk for heart disease by 36%. So this was a really important study, the one that ultimately drove Lipitor to generate over $100 billion in revenue. So I'm going to show you the actual data from the study, and it's right here. But here are the actual data from this study. And somewhere in here is a 36% risk reduction when you compare placebo with atorvastatin, the Lipitor. So if you look at survival, you see they're basically identical. No difference in mortality benefit. You see that tiny sliver of a difference between the red and the blue bars? That is a 36% reduction. Yes. This is the wonder drug effect. This is the effect that propelled Lipitor to generate over $100 billion in revenue. How can that be a 36% reduction in risk? When you calculate it and you look at the data, the actual difference is 1.1%. This is where you do some statistical hijinks. You take that 1.1% difference between the groups. Then you have the difference between placebo and 100. If you're not following me, it doesn't matter, because it's silly, right? It's like, so you take the 1.1 divided by 3, what do you get? You get 36. Okay, that's 36%. And that's why they say there is a 36% reduction. And so if you have truth in advertising, I think the 1% should actually be in the ad. Lipitor reduces heart attack by 1%. Okay.
And now I'm also taking Lipitor.
By the way, if you're health conscious and want to limit your sugars, you might like to know that there are 56 different names for sugars. Don't like the way just sugar sounds? How about organic evaporated cane juice, a completely natural sweetener? This kind of rebranding of words to make people react differently to them is all over the place.
Frank Luntz doesn't do issues. He does language around issues. He figures out what words will best sell an issue.
In Frank Luntz's book, Words That Work, he explains the importance of using the right word or phrase to evoke the right response from the listener. He says it's not what you say, it's what they hear.
Focus on those words that cause people to change their minds, change their behavior, even change their attitudes.
For example, the gambling industry became the gaming industry and completely changed its perception despite nothing about the industry actually changing. As Luntz says in the book, gambling looks like what an old man with a crumpled racing form does at the track, or feels like the services provided by some seedy back alley bookie in some smoke-filled room. Gaming is what families do together at the Hollywood-themed MGM Grand, New York, New York, or one of the other family-friendly resorts in Las Vegas. Gambling is a vice. Gaming is a choice. He begins his work with something similar to a focus group. He talks to members of the target market and runs words or phrases by them to see what they like and dislike.
You're going to use these to register whether you agree or disagree, whether you believe or disbelieve. The dials go from 0 to 100. Climbing, 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 changing fuels.
One of his most significant political works has been getting the public to finally be against the estate tax by removing that particular phrase from the political lexicon and replacing it with the more emotional, more personal death tax. In his book, originally published in January 2007, Lutz says a clear but somewhat narrow majority of Americans today support eliminating the so-called estate tax, but more than 70% would abolish the death tax.
It's the same tax, but nobody really knows what an estate is. But they certainly know what it means to be taxed when you die.
I'd like somebody to get rid of the death tax. That's what I want. I don't want to get taxed just because I died. Yeah. You know, I just don't...
Who's hungry?
One food rebranding effort was so successful that by 2002, the National Environmental Trust started a campaign to save a previously ignored fish species from being eaten into extinction. In 1977, fish wholesaler Lee Lance took Patagonian toothfish and renamed it
Chilean sea bass, I believe.
Because he knew no one would have toothfish for dinner. So when people come to associate certain ideas with certain words, it's useful to come up with new words that evoke a more pleasant reaction. For example, a hospital may think that you wouldn't react well to hearing that a catastrophic blunder killed your wife and child during a cesarean delivery. So it's better to describe the anesthesiologist having turned the wrong knob and giving the mother a fatal dose of nitrous oxide as a therapeutic misadventure. At least St. Mary's Hospital in Minneapolis in 1982 thought this wording would be better.
3 weeks ago in Los Angeles, the surgeons killed the patient in a series of incidents that the pathologist called incredible stupidity and incompetence. It included slitting the patient's throat during surgery. This was called a therapeutic misadventure.
William Lutz says the second kind of doublespeak is jargon, the specialized language of a trade or profession. It is useful and necessary to know jargon to communicate within your field, but whether it is doublespeak or not depends on where you use it. For example, describing your computer keyboard key to your friend as a catastrophically buckling compression column switch and actuator is unnecessary, but is an appropriate descriptor to use in a patent. After giving President Reagan a routine physical examination, Dr. Daniel Rouge said that previously documented decrement in auditory acuity and visual refractive error corrected with contact lenses were evaluated and found to be stable.
What?
That sounds a lot more impressive than saying the president's hearing and eyesight haven't changed since his last exam.
Where is the organoleptically detectable?
And finally, William Lutz says the third type of doublespeak is gobbledygook, or bureaucratese. Basically, such doublespeak is a matter of piling on words, of overwhelming the audience with words. There are plenty of examples of politicians using bureaucratese when forced to comment on something that they really don't want to comment on, but a good example is NASA's ex-associate administrator Jesse Moore's performance in terms of the lexicon he was operating under. After the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, Jesse Moore was asked if the performance of the shuttle program had improved with each launch. He answered, "I think our performance in terms of the liftoff performance and in terms of the orbital performance, we knew more about the envelope we were operating under, and we have been pretty accurately staying in that. And so I would say the performance has not by design drastically improved. I think we have been able to characterize the performance more as a function of our launch experience as opposed to it improving as a function of time." Pretty much everyone will at some point dress up facts in some kind of way, even in our day-to-day lives. People use doublespeak because from a young age we learn that consequences exist.
So tell me, did you eat the chocolate cake?
No, Mommy.
Just because someone uses doublespeak doesn't make them a crook, but when you don't quite understand what is being said about something important to you, it's good to ask, what exactly is this person saying? For example, you might be looking into investing and come across words like subprime mortgage or collateralized debt obligation. It would be good to clarify for yourself specifically what that means.
So the banks started filling these bonds with riskier and riskier mortgages. By the way, these risky mortgages are called subprime. So whenever you hear subprime, think shit.
Hold on, so mortgage bonds are dog shit. CDOs are dog shit wrapped in cat shit.
Yeah, that's right.
And something I've been wondering lately, what does detox mean? It seems there's hundreds of products promising to detox your body, but what exactly is being detoxed? Cadmium or mercury? Reactive oxygen species? Benzene? Wouldn't it be nice to know which toxins are being detoxified by which product, so I could make sure to drink this when I'm taking way too much aspirin, or take this for my excessive use of BHT-containing cosmetics? Maybe this detox tea product could help me detoxify metals or PCBs or something like that, but I wouldn't know because all I can find about the ingredients is that they are time-proven to help your body with the detoxifying process.
What the hell are you talking about?
Consolidation. The eating away of personal responsibility or ownership and personal wealth where the money and power is organized into corporate control for a singular purpose, where corporations acquire everything they can and collapse what they don't need, such as locally owned businesses. These corporations look like they are in competition with each other, but when you look past the first layer, it is obvious that they all have the same head of the snake. Consolidation leaves the population without any control at every layer of the community. Elon Musk is a fine example of a consolidator. He doesn't invent but purchase companies under his corporate umbrella for the illusion of good. But in reality, his business tactics are highly destructive to the environment and completely subordinate to AI. For consolidation within government, you have the right, which consolidates the public's wealth through corporate control or greed, also known as the American dream. And you have the left, which consolidates the public's wealth through taxation or social control. Both are evil and designed to control. The Law of Three, also known as the Law of Return or Threefold Law, is an ancient principle. Today, it is popular through Wicca, but Wicca is just an ancient witchcraft, rebranded. And none of it is positive no matter what a practitioner tells you. And a real practitioner knows they are powerless against the true, righteous, repentant, Holy Spirit-filled followers of Jesus. Masonry has 3 craft degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. There's the 3 great lights of Masonry: Holy Bible, square, and compass. The 3 pillars of Freemasonry: wisdom, strength, and beauty. The 3 lesser lights of Masonry, symbolic of the sun, the moon, and Mercury. The 3 virtues: brotherly love, relief, and truth. The 3 immovable jewels of the Masonic Lodge consist of the following: square, or square to the east, the jewel that teaches mortality; level, or the level to the west, the jewel that represents equality; plumb, or the plumb to the south, the jewel that characterizes decency of conduct, or follow the rules. Hegelian dialectics employ the law of 3. Many people explain Hegelian dialectics as action-reaction solution. That is true, but it's deeper than that. Hegelian dialectics are used to create permanent change within society. If you look into the past, you will see that the Hegelian dialectic was applied into every major change through history. It's a manipulation that uses emotion to gather public support. Just look at how the USA gathered around 9/11, or look at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. These were planned disasters to create a specific result, and each one was to get the USA population geared up for war. Hegelian dialectics is a tactic that takes something that is old and replaces it with something new. And the old way never returns. Every time in the past, the Hegelian dialectic was used to create a new golden age. Duality. I've talked about the occult's weapon of duality in earlier videos. Where one hand does one thing and the other hand does the opposite, duality thrives in the religions where good and evil must coexist. Order only comes through chaos. Where corporations destroy and create, where medical systems relieve pain to cover disease instead of cure, where political parties are created with opposing foundational principles, where even the occult system itself is built up of an obvious evil order and a false light order. For example, we are witnessing the fall of Black Masonry, or the Black Lodge, and the rise of White Masonry, or the White Lodge. This pattern has happened through history to show the progress of society. It's Hegelian dialectics that create the illusion of collapse and recover, like the Black Plague, where something evil is released causing chaos so the White Lodge can rebuild under a new paradigm. Order out of chaos, collapse, rebuild, collapse, rebuild. It is one of the major reasons why the Masonic imagery has a black and white floor. A duality tactic often used to manipulate the population in politics is the good guy versus the bad guy, or the right principle versus the wrong principle, using the pendulum of left and right. If the oligarchs want the majority of the population to believe something, they don't just tell them to believe it. In order to get massive change, the right or the left will commit something heinous, and through that public outrage, they commit change. The gender insanity is a fine example that pushed many centrists to the right. That was by design. You expose something abominable, and you show this abomination as the way of the future, and watch the population shift away from the abomination towards the individual speaking reason. This was Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro's role that reeled in so many. The occultist Elon Musk is in this duality right now. We know he's an occultist. We know his family are occultists. But because he's going against the obvious super left-wing evil ideologies, people are manipulated into thinking he's for the people. But in reality, it's not the super left-wing bringing in the AI. It's the one that the majority trusts the most, and their guard is down on that individual. People are cheering for Elon and his future plans. The layoffs of the redundant and unnecessary federal jobs is just the first step to a universal income and AI control. And when universal income arrives, the prison is fully set. You will not have free speech, and if you speak out, you won't have any credits to feed yourself. Through Musk, the prison will be built because he is Trump's right-hand man, the dark mega or dark wizard. And the population is in agreement with this relationship. Cloward-Piven Strategy. a Hegelian dialectic tactic using political duality through the liberal application of welfare. Number 1, overload a system. Number 2, create mass panic and hysteria as the system is overloaded. 3, oversee the destruction of the system. 4, replace the former system with a new system. The Cloward-Piven strategy, originating from a 1966 article by sociologists Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, propose the best way to achieve a revolutionary change in society is to overload the existing welfare system to the point of crisis. By creating a scenario where public assistance systems become so overburdened that they collapse, the strategy aims to force the government to implement new, more equitable systems of wealth redistribution. This strategy represents a form of ideological possession where the pursuit of ostensibly virtuous goals, like the social equity and social justice, masks a deeper, malevolent agenda. Justice and fairness in society hinge on the perception of a balance between providing for the needy and encouraging individual responsibility. Overburdening the welfare system changes this balance by creating dependency rather than empowerment. If the Cloward-Piven strategy were to succeed, it would precipitate a crisis that fundamentally questions the sustainability of the current welfare model. The strategy involves overwhelming the welfare system in order to force political change. The virtue signaling plays a critical role in this process. Advocates of the Cloward-Piven strategy often cloak their intentions in moral righteousness, portraying their actions as compassionate efforts to aid the disadvantaged. This veneer of virtue serves to deflect criticism and garner support, even as their methods inflict harm on the very populations they claim to champion. The real danger lies in the strategy manipulation of good intentions to justify coercive and destructive policies, ultimately eroding individual responsibility and freedom. The psychological impact of the welfare system collapse cannot be overstated. The sudden withdrawal of support would lead to widespread fear, anxiety, and despair and violence. The individuals who have depended on the welfare for survival would face a loss of security, stability, leading to mental health crisis and vandalism.
You see the new left, and almost specifically one of the professors in this building, Francis Fox Piven and Richard Cloward, in their book Regulating the Poor and in their movement, as almost prime movers in this disintegration of the black community in one sense, and the rise of this feeling or this paradigm of therapeutic alienation.
Francis Fox Piven and Richard Cloward created so much black pain, and it's really a shame how little this is known. It's very simple. The idea that there could be a kind of welfare policy where generation after generation stayed on it, nobody cared whether the people got a job, and you were paid for having kids, didn't exist until the late 60s. A lot of people seem, understandably, to think that that's the way welfare always was. It was that way for a good 30 years. That only started then. There's a reason why when you read a novel about the black poor in say, the 1930s or 40s, that welfare is generally mentioned once or twice. It was hard to get on, it barely paid you enough to eat, and social workers were always trying to get you off it. And this counted for whites as well as blacks. So we're not talking about welfare as a racial issue in the 30s or 40s. But starting in the late 60s, welfare was expanded by those Columbia social workers. Their idea was benevolent. They were trying to create a guaranteed income, but that didn't happen. And it left black communities where it was possible to spend your life, if you were a woman, living on welfare, and to spend your life making children you didn't have to take care of if you were a man. You couldn't do that in 1958 because the government wasn't going to take care of the kids. So the issue is not that black people were somehow evil to go on the welfare. If it was offered, of course, about every third person took it. That's human nature. But if that welfare hadn't existed, the black community today would be much more coherent than it was. There's no such thing as whole communities where having a father was strange until welfare was changed that way. It was one of the most important aspects of black history, what those people did to welfare legislation, although it should also be said that it was spearheaded by George Wiley, who was black. But still, it was a grievous grievous wrong. And the people involved in that, even today, the ones who are alive, have blood on their hands, and they had a more profound effect on the black community across this country than factories moving away or anybody using the word nigger or any of the other things that we're trained to think more about.
Trauma-based mind control. The entire world has been placed through a massive trauma in 2020 through 2023. When their mind goes through trauma, it becomes susceptible to instruction. There is a term for this called trauma-based mind control. There are different levels of this mind control depending on the level of trauma one goes through. It doesn't have to be on the extreme scale like the satanic ritually abused people. You just need to be in a place of fear over a long duration for a low level of trauma-based mind control to work. The extreme side of trauma-based mind control. Mind Control Programming Basics, Ellen P. Lachter, PhD. Trauma-based mind control programming can be defined as systematic torture that blocks the victim's capacity for conscious processing through pain, terror, drugs, illusion, sensory deprivation, sensory overstimulation, oxygen deprivation, cold, heat, spinning brain stimulation, and often near death, and then employ suggestion and/or classical and operant conditioning consistent with well-established behavioral modification principles to implant thoughts, directives, and perceptions in the unconscious mind, often in newly formed trauma-induced dissociated identities that force the victim to do, feel, think, or perceive things for the purpose of the programmer. The objective is for the victim to follow directives with no conscious awareness, including execution of acts in clear violation of the victim's moral principles, spiritual convictions, and volition. Installation of mind control programming relies on the victim's capacity to disassociate, which permits the creation of new walled-off personalities to hold and hide programming. Trauma-based mind control has varied stages and levels. You don't need an alternative personality to cause a panic and to follow instruction. You just need the mind in a suggestive state, and they will act on authority. A mind-controlled programmed victim is used as a piece of property that has been totally stripped away of all human rights and dignity. In the eyes of these entities, the victim's only reason to exist is to be owned, controlled, and used for the benefits of these slave masters. The coming social credit score will do this to the population. Mind control programming has been widely spread across the world. The following are typical candidates for mind control programmed slaves: politicians, government leaders, and key personnel, military leaders and key personnel, financial, industrial leaders and key personnel, influential academic or research personnel. The goal is for the ancient bloodlines to control the world's politics, military, economy, and researchers. In the eyes of these controlling bloodlines, if you are of any importance to their agenda to control the world, they simply cannot afford not to control you. Children are easily programmed and can be used for child sex trafficking, drug trafficking, intelligence gathering. They can also be programmed to be a sleeper slave that can be invoked later during a special circumstance by the programmers. Victims with special traits that can be used for military or genetic research purpose. These victims include but are not limited to victims from particular races that can be used by the military intelligence gathering purpose, victims who possess special genetic traits, for example, a special DNA type, a bloodline, a heritage, that can be used for genetic experiments, or victims that can generate huge profits to the entities. Victims with attractive appearances, advanced intelligence, special psychic abilities. Entertainment industry performers are used to influence the media, generate profit, and simply for the benefit of slave masters. No matter what side of the Republican, conservative, Democrat, liberal, duality program you sit in, admitting to yourself that you could be in a suggestive state, regardless of how smart you are, is the first step to freeing yourself. The second is removing yourself from the cause. weapon of choice, also known as illusion of choice. The weapon of choice isn't just a song by Fatboy Slim. It's a term telling you about the Masonic practice of weaponizing choices. Weaponizing choice is an occult tactic that creates so many options that an individual, group, or country can't decide on a specific path, and then they leave it to the leaders. The illusion of choice causes people to feel that they have a wide range of choices when in reality, their choices are limited or predetermined, or what they have an endless choice of doesn't make any impact whatsoever. A further dive into the tactic allows the public massive amounts of choice on products, but no real choice on who makes the product, what is put into the product, or who or what is in charge of a product. This belief can contribute to a false sense of control or extreme apathy, creating a walking dead automatons just moving through the motion, too busy to fight until it's too late. The synergy tactic. This is very much a branch of weapon of choice, but it's more calculated, and it is designed to create echo chambers or confirmation bias for those who are seeking answers. The interaction or cooperation of two or more organizations, substances, or other agents to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effects. You can see this in the YouTube influencers. As they share their channel viewers, as they visit each channel, they're using the synergy tactic to spread ideas, to spread information, all for your consumption. Postmodernism. Postmodernism is a term used to refer to a variety of artistic, cultural, and philosophical movements that claim to mark a break from modernism or current culture. This is where individuals create narratives or ways of life that ignore what is real and allow the individual to believe whatever they choose.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
You hear this when someone says, "What's your truth?" or "Speak your truth." They're not talking about honesty. They are talking about what they believe is true, even if what they believe is a lie. It's a mental security blanket. The security blanket won't protect the child, but it does create the illusion of protection for the child so they can sleep, or in this case, the individual can function within a fantasy world, a victimization factory. Postmodernism is taught in high school and post-secondary schools, allowing the individual to believe that they are learning wisdom and progressiveness or forward thinking. But the reality is they are being sucked into a nightmare filled with weaponized choices, dualities of perceived good and evil, laws of three, predictive programming, Hegelian dialectics. Disclosure event. This event is where the government or those in high positions of power disclose the evidence of alien life. During this time, the Masons will redefine history, not with the truth, but with a new grand lie. The great deception will be in full force, and all but the remnant will be aware. The disclosure event has been whispered since the 1960s, when the demonic encounters, normally known as alien abductions, were on the rise, and at the same time the propaganda from NASA captivated all. The population is fully prepared to accept this disclosure event. Golden Age. Through history, the Golden Age is the time where a society benefits through bursts of knowledge, wealth, and prosperity. However, the Golden Age cannot supersede until the Old Age is destroyed. When political servants talk about Golden Ages, it means chaos is about to come, so that order can bring a Golden Age, and society will never be the same. Typically, new world powers rise in a Golden Age. For example, the fall of France's nobility after the bubonic plague. Before the bubonic plague, the aristocrats and courts only spoke French. But after, a new language was formed that birthed the English language of today. English became and still is the business language. A golden age came after the Great War in World War II, when the whole wealth of nations was transferred to the United States. The final golden age brings the return to the antediluvian age of Atlantis and its high technology, or, biblically speaking, the days of Noah, where man lost dominion and were enslaved to the Nephilim. and other hybrids.
Thank you everyone for coming to listen to the talks today. My name's Dr. Christian Buckland. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a doctor of psychology. And when I saw the topic of government control on the agenda for today, I thought I really want to be here because this is something I've been talking about for the last 3 years. Has psychology been weaponized, and what techniques have been used against us? And originally when I sat down to write this talk, I was going to talk on informed consent. So if you look in the brochure, it says I'm going to talk on the fact that the psychological techniques that were used on us negated everyone's ability to give informed consent to a COVID injection. But as I was writing, I realized that there was lots of rumblings around saying that, are we returning to mandates? Is there going to be a lockdown coming in September or October? Are mask mandates coming back? And I thought, perhaps it's going to be really good to look back at what has happened over the last 3 years in terms of the psychological techniques that have been used on the public to gain behavioral change without the public's knowledge. Because if we can be open to looking at what's happened, we can start to predict the future. We can start telling our neighbours who might not think like us what might be coming next. Because the more people who are aware of what's happening and that there's psychological manipulation taking place, the more people that will start to see the world that we see it. The other thing I want to say is that if you can start to understand the techniques that were used for COVID, you'll start to see how it's being used in all other different agendas and ideologies. And if you look on the screen here, this was taken from the UN website. And it's the UN Secretary General saying behavioural science is a critical tool for the UN to progress on its mandate, whatever that is. And it goes on to say that UN entities are strongly encouraged to invest in behavioural science. Now, behavioural science is just basically behavioural psychology. It's a nice word for it. And the UN entities consist of things like the World Bank, the IMF, the Food and Agricultural Organization, the World Meteorological Organization. So you're going to see behavioural psychology being used to further many, many different agendas. And I've taken this also from the UN website because I thought it was really important. They were saying these are 5 topics, even though I've just put 4 on, to fit on the screen, that they really feel behavioural psychology can be used to further. And the first one you'll see is health. And you'll see there they're saying by emphasising social norms and trusted messengers, we can increase vaccination rates. And those are 2 techniques. Climate, going to see the same thing being used there. And gender equality, same thing. The last one, management and administration or sludge reduction, I think is really important because there were pictures attached to all of these boxes, but I had to remove them because they had a copyright symbol on. And the last one had a picture of a credit card with a receipt that said voucher. So I think that's giving us a hint that they're going to use behavioural psychology to get rid of cash and bring in digital currencies. So just be aware. The good news is this is nothing new. Governments have been using psychology for centuries. So this isn't anything new. The good news is we now have the internet, we can tell people what's going on, we know that these things are happening. And the reason why I put a quote from the psychological literature on the screen is I wanted to point out that they're saying that that psychology's been used for clandestine purposes such as conducting torture. And to me, the lockdowns, the deaths caused unnecessary, the mask mandates, the vaccine injuries and deaths, they feel like torture to me. And I also want to say that the many good doctors who are speaking here have found themselves unwillingly put into the position of being those persecuted political opponents. So I want to say a huge thank you to every doctor and scientist and everyone who speaks out. So what are these psychological techniques? I've put just a few of them on the screen. I'm going to whiz through them really, really quickly. Now the first one, and everyone's going to know them, we've been hearing the word fear all day, is the nudges. And now nudges sound, it's not too bad, it's just a little nudge. It's not a shove, it's not a shove. It's just a nudge, so nothing's too bad. But actually to me, they are the most dangerous of almost all of the behavioural science techniques. And a good way to describe the nudges are the fact that if behavioural scientists know that if we do this to the population, this will be the outcome. So it's very predictable. And the most important and easy nudges to describe are when we use psychological techniques to induce the feelings of fear, shame and guilt. And we know that fear has been the driving force behind the entire COVID narrative. Artificially increasing the levels of fear by saying If you get COVID, you're all going to die. There's no cure for it. I remember that phrase, COVID doesn't discriminate. It clearly does. It goes after the elderly and the people who are very, very poorly. We've also, and what the thing about fear is that when everyone is frightened, they go on a quest for knowledge because they want to reduce that anxiety. And that explained why everyone tuned into the government daily press briefings, because they were hoping that the father figure, so in my country was the Prime Minister, the father figure would give the scared children a little bit of reassurance. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. But instead, they would give them more and more fear to keep the cycle going. We also saw the use of shame. And that, to me, has been an awful thing. We've heard some of the good doctors talking about how they've been shamed for just speaking the truth. But one thing that happened to the public in my country was we had the chief of the Metropolitan Police saying that she hopes that the public will shame other members of the public into compliance, which to me is one of the most unethical things there is. Because I work with shame a lot in my day job, and putting people who struggle with sort of feelings of shame, maybe something's happened to them in the past, putting them in a position where they have a shame response is greatly dangerous. It really, really is. And then, of course, we had the guilt nudge as well. The health secretary saying, don't catch coronavirus and spread it around and kill granny, something like that. So there was a lot of guilt, and loads of children really believed they were going to kill their grandparents. So the nudges, we all know them. Then we got heuristics. And that's creating mental shortcuts in the public, reinforcing the status quo. And a really easy way of sort of suggesting this is letting people make other decisions for you. Because as human beings, we don't like making difficult decisions. What if we get it wrong? So it's a lot easier to hope that someone else has made it. So that's why you saw in the media all of these videos and news reports of queues and queues of people outside of vaccination centres. So the public would go, oh, it's the right thing to do. They've all gone through the difficult decision-making process. I can just follow them. And then when they tell you that supply of the vaccines are scarce, even more people go, oh, better go and get one now. We've also seen commitment bias being used. Easiest way to describe this to me is doubling down on something. So even though something has changed, you remain committed to the cause. And that's what we saw when originally we were told that the vaccines will stop you catching and spreading COVID. And when the data became quite clear, that's not the case at all. You saw a deliberate push for politicians and celebrities to post on Twitter, I've just tested positive for COVID, but thanks to the vaccines, I'm double boosted, I'm not too bad. And what that was all about doing was saying to people, forget what we originally told you, that it's going to stop you getting it and spreading it. It's all about it doesn't make COVID so bad. So people remained committed to their original view that the vaccine was good. Then we've got cognitive and availability bias, again, helping to create more mental shortcuts in the public. And this is where we fill in the blanks when we're trying to create a risk assessment with the most easily and available stored memories. And this is the reason why we had censorship. So when I said the nudges are the worst one, this one is also the worst one as well, because this is the one that promoted the use of censorship. Because when people were conducting their risk assessment early on, they were having to pull on what available information they had. So, you know, the good doctors here couldn't get the word out. Vitamin D, you never heard anyone talking about that. You heard all of the fear. So that one is one of the most dangerous ones, it really is. And then we've got sludge. And if you remember a minute ago, I said they were going to use sludge reduction potentially to get rid of cash and to promote digital currencies. What sludge is where you're given two choices. One really easy option, one really difficult option. The first option is coated in lovely non-stick shiny Teflon. If you take that option, you slide through life with ease. The other option is coated in sludge. If you take that one, it's going to be like wading through treacle. And that's what we saw with the vaccine rollout. It's not just going to stop you spreading it and getting it. If you don't take one, you can't go on holiday. You probably can't get into a nightclub. You're probably going to lose your job. And you're probably going to get called a granny killer. So everyone wants an easy life, so most people will then take the easy option. So lots and lots of people chose to get a COVID injection, even though the risk assessment they had done said they didn't want one, but they did it because of things like the fear and the shame and the guilt that their children have been locked up for 2 years and they just want to take them on a holiday. So sludge is a really, really powerful one because it convinces people who have already made a decision to go against their original decision. And then we've got the trusted messengers. And we saw this really early on, and we still see it now, where celebrities, doctors, scientists, they are promoted to push the original narrative. And I found it really interesting because I remember seeing a video where the UN were boasting that they had a collaboration with TikTok to get certain doctors verified status so their reach was increased. And that was all about flooding the internet. Censor any doctors saying anything different and elevate our specific messenger doctors. So those were just some of the techniques, and I appreciate I've just whistled through them. But I wanted to also offer some of sort of my views and my sort of observations of other psychological techniques that we use to back up those behavioral science techniques. And the first one is infantilization, coercion and incentives, rewarding and punishing, just how parents often parent their children. But another way of looking at infantilization is that in the UK, we could say that the Prime Minister at the time was the father figure, the National Health Service was the mother figure, and the children were the public. And what we saw was mum and dad manipulating and lying to the public. And that's always made me wonder, could there be a correlation between people who have witnessed manipulation in the past, whether that's from parents or caregivers, or been in relationships where they've seen it, and people who are quick to question the official narrative? I don't know, but I wonder. The other one which I find really worrying is idolization. In the UK, we were encouraged to place the National Health Service on the highest pedestal ever. Children were told to paint rainbows with "Thank the NHS" and "Save the NHS" and place them outside their home. And on a Thursday, we went outside and we clapped for the NHS. And if your neighbour didn't clap, you told them off and told them to get out there. And what that did was enable something called cognitive dissonance to occur. And cognitive dissonance is where you hold two conflicting beliefs at the same time that shouldn't really exist together, but you allow them to. So on one hand, we had everyone saying the NHS is the best thing ever. It's amazing. And at the same time, they also knew that lots and lots of people were dying in their own homes from any disease going because the NHS had effectively closed its doors. So lots of unnecessary death because the NHS had closed, but thank you, NHS, it's wonderful. So idolization really worries me. When we're told that someone or something is really good and something or someone is really bad, always question, is that a psychological operation? And we often see that with war. And speaking of war, the language that was used was really reminiscent of all things to do with war. We're all in it together. No one is safe till we're all safe. They were all designed to feed into a good versus evil scenario. Because everyone wants to be the good guy. We all dream about being a superhero or being the good guy. We very rarely dream about being a villain. I hope not. And what that does is put us all into camps. We're the good guys, we're the evil guys. And then it became a kind of very, what's the right word? Well, I suppose tribe is the right word. It meant that there were people who were questioning the narrative, who were the baddies. It was nice, and people actually like having an enemy. It gives us a sense of purpose and meaning to our lives. And over the last, 20 years, we've become less and less meaningful. Life has become very stale. Technology has really increased a dependency on other use of technology, and that has taken us away from a connection with things like God and society and other things. So people were really lacking meaning. And this is why it's really difficult to get through to certain people. Even when you present new data, they will still say things like, but people are dropping dead in the streets in China, Christian. And you show them the data and nothing changes. And it's because they don't want to lose that sense of connection and meaning and purpose that they built up in 2020. It's very alluring. And that is why the vaccine injured are one of the most heavily censored group there are. I'm the psychological advisor to the largest COVID vaccine injury support group in the UK, and I have never witnessed something so awful that goes on with them. They are telling their lived experience stories. This happened to me. And all of a sudden YouTube just take them down. It is extremely dehumanizing. And the reason why that occurs is because those stories do change people's opinions. They get through to the people who are really stuck because they look at the vaccine injured and say, but they're like me. They took it. They thought this was right. And now they're injured and no one's listening to them. No one cares. So the vaccine injured are so sensitive because they do get through. And we've also seen people talking about repetition a lot. When you see a lot of repetition, is that another psychological operation? 3-word phrases were really, really used. They're very hypnotic. Hands, face, space was being used all over the time in the UK. Because what that does, it provides an access to people's unconscious processes. And that helps people to start behaving without actually thinking. And that is the whole premise of behavioral science. Change people's behaviors without them even knowing that you're changing the behaviors. And the last one I brought up, I just put it up there kind of when I was typing this up, and it's overriding the mind's protective measures. Because there's a phenomena called psychic numbing. And what that is that when people originally see suffering for the first time, they spring into action, they demand a response from the government and from other people. But over time, that leaping into action and demanding a response dwindles. People get numb to it. Because if it didn't, we'll be left in a state of constant trauma. So the mind has a very, very good protective mechanism that makes people go, it's the same suffering. I don't need a response. Well, not the same level of response. And that's making me wonder, is this why we're constantly being drip-fed different things to be frightened of? Be frightened of inflation, food shortages. We've got a war coming. Could be a nuclear war. We've got global warming. It could be global burning. It feels like this cycle. And so it made me wonder when we were looking at, the talk of restrictions coming back, is it just the time of COVID to return again, just keeping us constantly in a state of fear? I don't know. So when I said, are the restrictions coming back, could well just be another psychological operation in itself, and might not be. So what's the literature on the use of behavioral science say? It makes it very, very clear that if governments want to use behavioral science on the public, it needs the permission and the ongoing approval of the public. Now, I don't remember anyone asking me if I want to have the pants frightened off me to change how I act. So it shows they didn't listen to the safety mechanisms. And I also put here another thing that I thought was really important, that the UK government were being advised around about the same time that COVID started to happen and the lockdowns happened, that there was a link between the use of behavioural science and an increase in suicide. And they didn't listen to the safety mechanisms or the risk factors. And to show that it's known it was wrong what they did, we've got the current Prime Minister telling us it was wrong. It's wrong to scare people like that. Absolutely, it was wrong. We've got an educational psychologist who sat on the advisory panel to the government who recommended using fear as a means of control, saying it's not ethical, and saying it smacks of totalitarianism. And we've got a board member of the Behavioural Insights team saying the most egregious and far-reaching mistake was the level of fear willingly conveyed on the public. I agree with that, but fear goes hand in hand with censorship. Because to back up censorship, you have to make people frightened. And if we make an example of the doctors by sending them through all these hearings or board, whatever they've been saying, they've been through this, all the good doctors have been telling us today, other doctors don't speak up. So censorship and fear go hand in hand. And I want to just finish on this quote to back up that point. It's by Harry Truman, and it was a special message to the Congress of the Internal Security of the United States in 1950. And he said, once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one way to go. And that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all of its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. We cannot let that happen. We have to speak up and keep speaking up and telling other people what's going on. So I want to say once again, thank you to everyone for speaking up. Everyone who comes here, you're making a huge difference. And I'm really grateful and honoured to be here talking today. Thank you very much.
If you're finding this helpful, please share this video. Send this to the people you care for and the people you pray for and your favorite podcasters and teachers. This video will go nowhere if you don't.